The dragon filled the observation deck with its presence. Vaxarthian was old, even by dragon standards. His scales gleamed like polished obsidian, each one marked with patterns that told stories of empires that no longer existed. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the metal walls of Nexus Prime Station, making the structure itself seem to hum with ancient authority. "You are the human representative?" Vaxarthian's golden eyes studied the small figure before him. Dr. Amar Chen stood barely as tall as the dragon's forelimb. She wore a simple gray suit, her black hair pulled back in a practical bun. She did not flinch under the dragon's gaze. "I am Dr. Amar Chen, representing Earth and the human collective." Around them, the observation deck held representatives from dozens of species. They had come to witness humanity's formal introduction to the draconic conclave. Some watched with curiosity, others with pity. Everyone knew how these meetings went. The dragons would demonstrate their superiority. The newcomers would acknowledge it. And the galactic order would continue as it had for millions of years. Vaxarthian settled onto his haunches, still towering over the assembled crowd. "Your species is young. You have existed for mere moments in cosmic time. You have only just learned to travel between stars." His tone was not cruel, merely stating facts. "We dragons have maintained peace and order in this galaxy since before your world had multicellular life." "That's impressive," Chen said simply. "We have much to learn." Several species in the crowd nodded approvingly. This human understood her place. But Vaxarthian sensed something in her tone, something that made him look closer. Her body language showed respect, but not submission. Her eyes met his without fear, but also without challenge. "Interesting. We will share our knowledge with you," Vaxarthian continued. "The foundation of all galactic civilization rests upon the immutable theorems. These are truths we have proven beyond any doubt. They govern physics, mathematics, even the nature of consciousness itself." He gestured with one massive claw, and holographic displays materialized in the air around them. The theorems appeared in multiple languages, translated for all species present. They were beautiful in their complexity, equations and proofs that described the fundamental workings of reality. Other species had spent centuries studying them. The dragons had spent eons perfecting them. Chen studied the displays with clear interest. She pulled out a small tablet and began taking notes. Vaxarthian approved. Humans might be primitive, but at least this one showed proper respect for knowledge. "These theorems," Vaxarthian explained, "are the reason our technology works. They are why we can fold space, manipulate gravity, and extend life indefinitely. Every civilization that has joined the conclave is built upon these foundations. They are absolute truth." Chen nodded slowly, still studying the equations. The other representatives began to disperse, the formal introduction essentially complete. A few lingered to exchange pleasantries with the human, offering advice on adapting to galactic society. Vaxarthian was about to dismiss the gathering when Chen spoke up. "I have a question about Theorem 7. The dragon paused. Questions were not unusual. Younger species often needed clarification on the more complex aspects. "Ask." Chen pointed to a section of the displayed equation. "Here, in the foundational proof, there's an assumption about the behavior of quantum fields in the presence of extreme gravitational gradients. The assumption is that field coherence decreases uniformly as gradient intensity increases." "Correct," Vaxarthian said. "This has been proven through countless applications across millions of years." "Proven through application," Chen repeated carefully. "But has it been tested directly?" "In controlled conditions with isolated variables." Vaxarthian felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of uncertainty. The theorem works. Every technology built upon it functions precisely as predicted. "That is proof. It's evidence," Chen agreed. Very strong evidence. But I notice the assumption treats the relationship as purely linear. What if it's asymptotic? Or if there's a threshold effect at extreme values? The applications you mention might never reach those conditions, so you wouldn't see the difference. The observation deck had gone quiet. The few remaining representatives were staring. No one questioned the immutable theorems. That was the point. They were immutable. Vaxarthian's centuries of diplomatic training kept his voice level. "You are suggesting we are wrong?" "No," Chun said immediately. "I'm not qualified to suggest that. I'm asking if the assumption has been examined under all possible conditions. It's a genuine question, not a challenge. In human science, we try to test our assumptions, even when everything seems to work. Sometimes we find our theories are right. Sometimes we find they're even more right than we thought, but in different ways." Vaxarthian considered this. The assumption was so basic, so fundamental, that he could not remember when it had last been examined. It simply was. The theorem had been old when Vaxarthian was young, and he had lived for 200,000 years. "The theorem works," he said again, but this time he heard something different in his own voice. Was it defensiveness? Chun bowed respectfully. "I'm sure it does. Thank you for your patience with my questions. We have much to learn from you." The meeting concluded with formal pleasantries. Chun departed with her small human delegation. The other species filtered away, chattering about the newcomers. Soon, Vaxarthian stood alone in the observation deck, staring at the holographic display of Theorem 7. Why had the human's question bothered him? The theorem worked. That was undeniable. And yet, he found himself examining the assumption she had mentioned. It was so basic, so embedded in the proof, that it was almost invisible. The theorem had been tested through application countless times, yes. But had anyone ever directly tested that specific assumption under extreme conditions? Vaxarthian pulled up historical records, something he had not done for that particular theorem in millennia. He traced back through the proof's development, back through generations of dragons who had refined and perfected it. The assumption was there from the beginning, accepted because it made the mathematics work and because all applications confirmed theorem's predictions. But Chun's question lingered. What if the assumption was incomplete? What if it worked under all tested conditions, but failed under untested ones? The applications never reached certain extreme values because the theorem itself indicated those conditions were impractical or impossible. A circular proof? No, that was too harsh. But perhaps an untested edge case? The dragon turned away from the display, troubled. In one brief conversation, a human had made him question something he had never thought to examine. It should have been irritating. Instead, Vaxarthian felt something he had not experienced in many thousands of years. Curiosity.vax or THIA spent 3 weeks reviewing the foundations of Theorem 7. He worked alone in his private research chamber, a vast space carved from a hollow asteroid. Around him floated dozens of holographic displays, each showing different aspects of the theorem's development and applications. The work was painstaking. The theorem had been refined over millions of years by thousands of dragon scholars. Every application, every test, every verification was documented. Vaxarthian examined them all, looking for what the human had asked about. He found something unexpected. The assumption Chen had mentioned was tested, but only within certain parameters. Every application of the theorem naturally stayed within those bounds because the theorem itself suggested venturing beyond them would be pointless. The mathematics worked perfectly within the tested range. But what lay beyond? Vaxarthian created simulations, pushing the variables to extremes. The equations became unstable at the edges. That could mean the theorem broke down, or it could simply mean his simulation methods were inadequate for those conditions. There was only one way to know for certain. He needed to run a real experiment. The dragon composed a message to Dr. Chun. He kept it brief and formal, requesting a meeting to discuss her question. Her response came quickly. She would be honored to meet with him. They met in a neutral laboratory on Nexus Prime, a facility designed for multi-species research. Chun arrived with 2 colleagues, both carrying equipment cases. Vaxarthian came alone. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Vaxarthian said. "Your question has proven more interesting than I initially expected." Chun smiled. "Did you find something?" "I found that we have never directly tested the assumption under extreme conditions. Our applications never required it, so the question never arose." Vaxarthian displayed his simulation results. "I attempted to model what might happen at the edges, but the simulations are inconclusive." One of Chun's colleagues, a young man named Dr. Reeves, leaned forward to study the displays. "You'd need actual experimental data, but generating these conditions would require tremendous energy." "We have tremendous energy," Vaxarthian said simply. "What we have not had is a reason to use it for this purpose. Until now." Chun set down her equipment case. "Are you proposing a joint experiment?" "I am proposing we test something that should not need testing," Vaxarthian said. "In dragon culture, this is unusual. We do not waste resources examining what we already know to be true." "But you're not certain it's true," Chun said gently. "Not at the edges." Vaxarthian felt that flicker of uncertainty again, stronger now. "No, I am not certain." The admission felt strange. Dragons were certain. That was their nature, their strength. Certainty had guided galactic civilization for eons. And yet, speaking those words, Vaxarthian felt something unexpected. Relief. They spent the next month designing the experiment. Chun and her team brought perspectives Vaxarthian had never considered. Human science, he learned, was built on doubt. Humans assumed they might be wrong and designed their experiments to prove themselves incorrect. If the experiment failed to disprove their hypothesis, they gained confidence. But they never claimed absolute certainty. "We had a scientist named Karl Popper," Chun explained as they calibrated instruments. "He argued that you can never truly prove something is always true, only that it hasn't been proven false yet. So we keep testing, keep looking for the conditions that might break our theories." "That seems inefficient," Vaxarthian observed. "It is," Chun agreed. "But it keeps us humble. And sometimes we discover that what we thought was true was only approximately true. Then we find a deeper truth underneath." The experiment itself was elegant. They would create an artificial quantum field and subject it to extreme gravitational gradients, far beyond anything that occurred naturally in the galaxy. Then they would measure how the field coherence changed. According to Theorem 7, the coherence should decrease uniformly as the gradient increased. A straight line on the graph, following the prediction precisely. Other dragons had begun to notice Vaxarthian's work. Word spread through the conclave that an elder was testing an immutable theorem. Some young dragons expressed interest. Older dragons expressed concern. Elder Sithraxi visited Vaxarthian's laboratory 3 days before the scheduled experiment. She was ancient, even older than Vaxarthian. Her silver scales dulled with age. "What are you doing, old friend?" she asked without preamble. "Testing a hypothesis," Vaxarthian said. "The theorems are not hypotheses. They are proven truths. Proven under certain conditions," Vaxarthian corrected. "We are examining whether those conditions represent all possible cases." Sithraxi's tail lashed in agitation. "This human has poisoned your thinking. We know the theorem is true. We have known it for longer than most civilizations have existed. Then the experiment will confirm what we know," Vaxarthian said calmly. Where is the harm? The harm is in the doubt itself, Sithraxi hissed. We are dragons. We do not doubt. That is what makes us leaders. If we begin to question everything, what happens to the order we have maintained? Vaxarthian met her gaze steadily. If our order cannot withstand questions, perhaps it is not as strong as we believe. Sithraxi left without another word. But Vaxarthian knew she would speak to the other elders. This experiment had become political. The day of the experiment arrived. The laboratory was crowded with observers. Dragons, humans, and representatives from a dozen other species filled the observation gallery. Some came out of scientific curiosity. Others came to witness what they saw as either a historic moment or a dangerous precedent. Chun stood beside Vaxarthian at the control station. Her hands moved over the interface with practiced confidence. Power levels are optimal. Field generators are aligned. We're ready when you are. Vaxarthian looked at the assembled crowd, then back at the equipment. Centuries of certainty pressed down on him. But beneath that weight, he felt something else. The same curiosity that had brought him to this moment. Begin the experiment, he said. The equipment hummed to life. Energy readings spiked as the artificial quantum field formed in the containment chamber. Gravitational generators activated, creating a gradient that increased in carefully controlled increments. At first, everything matched the predictions. The field coherence decreased uniformly as the gradient intensified. The graph displayed on the main screen showed a perfect straight line. Then they reached the extreme values. The conditions that had never been tested before. The line wavered. The change was tiny, barely visible on the display. A deviation of less than 1,000%. But it was there. The field coherence did not decrease uniformly at extreme values. Instead, it showed a slight curve, an asymptotic behavior approaching a limit. The observation gallery erupted in noise. Dragons roared. Humans exclaimed. Other species chattered in their various languages. Chun and her team immediately began recording data, their expressions intense with concentration. Vaxarthian stared at the graph. The deviation was so small. Functionally, it would make no difference to any existing application of the theorem. The theorem still worked for all practical purposes, but it was not precisely, absolutely, perfectly true. We need to repeat this, Chun said, her voice cutting through the noise. Multiple trials with different parameters. We need to verify this result. They ran the experiment 6 more times over the next 2 days. Each time, the result was the same. At extreme conditions, the theorem showed a deviation. Tiny but real. Vaxarthian stood in his chamber on the 3rd day, alone again, staring at the compiled data. 7 successful trials, all showing the same pattern. The immutable theorem was mutable after all. He should have felt defeated. Instead, he felt alive in a way he had not experienced in millennia. Because if this theorem could be refined, improved, made more accurate, then what else might they discover? One human had made him doubt. And in that doubt, Vaxarthian had found something precious. The possibility of being wrong. And therefore, the possibility of learning something new. The news spread through the conclave like fire through dry grass. An immutable theorem was not immutable. The deviation was small, functionally insignificant for most applications, but the principle was enormous. If one theorem could be refined, then perhaps others could be as well. Dragon society fractured along unfamiliar lines. Young dragons, those under 50,000 years old, reacted with excitement. They flooded research facilities, requesting access to review other theorems. They sent messages to Vaxarthian asking for guidance. Some traveled to meet Dr. Chun, eager to learn human methods of inquiry. The elder dragons reacted differently. Grand Elder Korshathis called an emergency convocation of the conclave. He was the oldest living dragon, his scales pale as bone, his eyes like chips of ice. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 500,000 years. "We face a crisis," Krishathis announced to the assembled dragons. "Not a crisis of fact, but a crisis of faith. The immutable theorems have guided our civilization since before most of you were hatched. They are the foundation of our technology, our society, our very identity as dragons. And now, because of a trivial deviation found under absurd conditions that will never naturally occur, some of you question everything." Vaxarthian stood among the gathered dragons. He kept his silence, waiting to see how this would unfold. "The human asked a question," one young dragon said. "Should we not have answered it?" "The human planted a seed of doubt," Korshathis replied. "And doubt is poison to certainty. We have maintained galactic peace for millions of years because we knew what was true. Other species looked to us for guidance because we were certain. If we begin to doubt, if we begin to question every established truth, what becomes of our authority? What good is authority built on unexamined assumptions?" Vaxarthian asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Korshathis fixed Vaxarthian with a cold stare. "You conducted this experiment. You validated the human's doubt. What have we gained, old friend? What has this discovery given us except uncertainty?" "Knowledge," Vaxarthian said simply. "We now understand Theorem 7 more accurately than before. We can refine our applications, explore new possibilities that the limitation we discovered might allow. Or we could have continued with the theorem as it was. And nothing in the galaxy would have changed," Korshathis countered. "The theorem worked. It still works. All you have done is prove that it is not perfect. But we are not served by perfection. We are served by certainty." Another elder Drakethel spoke up. "I have reviewed 3 other theorems in the past weeks. I found similar assumptions, untested at their edges. Should we examine those as well? And if we do, where does it end? Will we spend the next million years testing things we already know to be functionally true? Better that than spending the next million years believing things that are functionally true to be absolutely true," Vaxarthian said. "There is a difference that matters only to philosophers," Korshathis said dismissively. "Not to civilization." But the debate had already begun in earnest. Dragons argued in the halls of Nexus Prime, in research facilities across the galaxy, in private chambers and public forums. Some defended the traditional view. Others embraced the new perspective. Many stood somewhere in the middle. Uncertain which path was correct, the humans found themselves at the center of a storm. They had not anticipated Dr. Chun received threats from some species who feared the destabilization of dragon authority. She received gratitude from others who saw opportunity in the changing order. She received countless requests for interviews, consultations, and collaborations. Through it all, she maintained a careful neutrality. "We simply asked a question," she told one persistent journalist. "What happens next is not for us to decide." But Korshathis decided something. He issued a formal challenge. The announcement came through official channels. Grand Elder Korshathis challenged Dr. Amara Chun to a formal debate before the full conclave. The topic, whether the philosophy of doubt that humans practiced was beneficial or harmful to galactic civilization. If Chun could not adequately defend her position, humans would be expelled from the conclave. Their ambassadors would be sent home, their access to galactic technology revoked, their world quarantined from contact. Humanity would develop in isolation, their doubt contained where it could not spread. If Chun succeeded in her defense, the dragons would acknowledge that even the immutable theorems could be examined, questioned, and refined. The change would be formalized, affecting the foundation of how the conclave operated. The stakes could not be higher. Chun sat in her quarters on Nexus Prime. reviewing notes for the debate. Vaxarthian had come to visit her, his massive form barely fitting through the doorway designed for smaller species. "You did not ask for this," Vaxarthian said. "Korshathis should be debating me, not you. I conducted the experiment." "But I asked a question," Chun replied. She looked tired, the weight of representing her entire species visible in the lines around her eyes. "And maybe that's appropriate. This isn't really about the experiment. It's about how we approach knowledge itself. Are you prepared?" Chun laughed, a sound without much humor. "How do you prepare to defend doubt? The moment I claim certainty about uncertainty, I've contradicted myself." "Then do not claim certainty," Vaxarthian suggested. "Present your case honestly. Show why doubt has served humanity well. Let the conclave decide, and if they decide against us, then humans will go home, develop on your own, and perhaps return in a few thousand years when the galaxy is ready for your perspective." Vaxarthian's tone was gentle. "Or perhaps you will decide we are not worth the trouble and stay away permanently. Either outcome is acceptable." Chun shook her head. "Not to me. We've seen the wonders of galactic civilization. We've met species from across the stars. We've learned so much. I don't want to lose that because we asked an inconvenient question." "Then fight for it," Vaxarthian said. "Not with certainty, but with truth. Show us why doubt is not weakness." The day of the debate arrived. The main chamber of Nexus Prime was filled to capacity. Every dragon in the conclave attended, along with representatives from hundreds of species. Humans watched from Earth, the debate broadcast across communication networks. This was history in the making. Korshathis took his position on one side of the chamber. His presence was commanding, his voice resonant with authority. Chun stood on the other side, tiny by comparison, but standing straight and calm. The moderator, a neutral party from an ancient species of energy beings, established the rules. Each side would present their position. Then they would respond to each other's arguments. Finally, the conclave would vote on whether humanity's philosophy of doubt was compatible with membership in galactic civilization. Korshathis spoke first. His voice filled the chamber with power. "Doubt is chaos," he began. "Certainty is order. For millions of years, the Draconic Conclave has maintained peace in this galaxy because we knew what was true. We established laws based on proven theorems. We made decisions based on verified facts. We guided younger species with confidence because we had confidence. Remove that certainty. Introduce doubt into every decision, and what remains? Endless debate. Constant questioning. Paralysis in the face of choices. Civilization requires foundation stones, and our foundation stones have been the immutable theorems. Yes, we discovered a tiny deviation in one theorem. But does that deviation improve anything? Does it make the galaxy safer, more prosperous, more just? Or does it simply make us less certain of ourselves?" It continued for several minutes, building his case with the skill of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. When he finished, the chamber was silent, his words hanging in the air like a pronouncement of inevitable truth. Then, Chun stepped forward to speak. Her voice was quieter than Korshathis, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. She did not try to match his commanding presence. Instead, she spoke with simple honesty. "I'm going to tell you about being wrong," she began. Chun walked slowly across the chamber floor as she spoke, her movements deliberate and calm. "Humans used to believe the Earth was flat. We were certain of it. We built our understanding of the world on that certainty. Then we discovered we were wrong. The Earth is round. That discovery didn't destroy us. It opened up navigation, exploration, and eventually space travel." She gestured to the holographic displays that appeared around her, showing images from human history. We believed the sun revolved around Earth. We were certain. Religious authorities staked their credibility on it. Scientists defended it with mathematical models that worked well enough for everyday observation. Then we discovered we were wrong. Earth revolves around the sun. That discovery didn't end civilization. It began modern astronomy. More images appeared. Scientific diagrams, photographs of Earth from space, images of galaxies. We believed time was absolute and universal. We were certain. Every clock, every measurement, every calculation assumed time flowed the same for everyone, everywhere. Then Einstein showed us we were wrong. Time is relative. It bends and stretches based on speed and gravity. That discovery didn't break physics. It gave us nuclear energy, GPS satellites, and the theoretical foundation for the faster-than-light travel that brought us to you. Chun stopped walking and faced the assembled dragons directly. Every time we were certain, we were wrong. Not completely wrong. Our flat Earth models worked fine for building houses and farming fields. Our geocentric models predicted planetary positions well enough for early astronomy. Our absolute time worked perfectly for anything moving slower than a significant fraction of light speed. We weren't stupid. We were approximately correct. But approximate correctness looked like absolute certainty until we tested the edges. Korshathis spoke up. And each time you were wrong, you experienced chaos. Wars were fought over heliocentrism. Religious institutions split. Social upheaval followed every major scientific revolution. You prove my point. Doubt creates instability. Change creates instability, Chun corrected gently. But stagnation creates fragility. Yes, discovering we were wrong was uncomfortable. But staying wrong would have been worse. If we had clung to our certainty about flat Earth, we would never have sailed across oceans. If we had maintained our certainty about geocentrism, we would never have understood orbital mechanics. If we had insisted time was absolute, we would never have developed the technology that brought us here. She paused, letting her words settle. Grand Elder Korshathis says doubt is poison to certainty. I say certainty without examination is a comfortable lie. It feels good. It feels safe. But it stops growth. A young dragon in the audience spoke up. But where does it end? If we question everything, we can never act. We become paralyzed by infinite doubt. Chun smiled. That's a good question, and it gets to the heart of how humans approach knowledge. We don't doubt everything all the time. We doubt strategically. We use theories that work, but we stay open to improving them. We act on the best information we have, but we remain willing to change course if new information appears. It's not about being uncertain about everything. It's about being honest about what we know, what we think we know, and what we don't know. She pulled up data from the Theorem 7 experiment. Look at this deviation. It's tiny. For every practical application you've ever used, the theorem works perfectly. So we don't throw it away. We refine it. We understand it better. And maybe, just maybe, that better understanding leads to something new. A technology you never tried because the theorem said it wouldn't work. An application that becomes possible because you understand the edge cases. Vaxarthian spoke from his position among the assembled dragons. I have already found 3 such possibilities. Small refinements to existing technology that the deviation might allow. Nothing revolutionary, but improvements nonetheless. Korshathis turned to face Vaxarthian. Improvements we survived millions of years without. Was it worth the disruption? That depends on what you value, Vaxarthian replied. If you value stability above all else, then no. If you value growth, even slow growth, then yes. And what of our authority? Korshathis challenged. Other species look to dragons for certainty. If we admit we can be wrong, Why should they follow our guidance? Chun stepped forward again. May I answer that? Korshathis gestured for her to continue. On Earth, we have this concept in science. The more confident a researcher is, the more skeptical we become. We trust scientists who say, the evidence strongly suggests, more than those who say, I am absolutely certain. Because the ones who admit uncertainty are the ones who have actually examined their assumptions. Your authority doesn't come from never being wrong. It comes from being wise enough to recognize when you need to look more closely. She looked around the chamber at the hundreds of faces watching her. You want to know what humans really think about dragons? We're in awe of you. You've lived for millions of years. You've built a civilization that spans the galaxy. You've maintained peace among thousands of species. That's incredible. But the thing that would really impress us, if you could do all that while still being curious, if you could be powerful and humble at the same time. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Korshathis spoke, his voice softer than before. You make it sound simple. Just admit uncertainty and continue forward. But you are young. You have not lived long enough to see how doubt can fester, how questions can multiply, how civilizations can tear themselves apart over disagreements about fundamental truths. You're right, Chun said. We haven't lived millions of years. We've barely been a technological species for a few centuries. But in that short time, we've gone from horse-drawn carriages to faster-than-light travel. Not because we were certain, but because we kept testing, kept questioning, kept refining. Our short lifespan might actually be an advantage here. We don't have time to get comfortable. We're always pushing, always curious, because we know we'll die before we see all the answers. She walked closer to where Korshathis stood. You've built something beautiful here. A galactic civilization based on proven knowledge. I'm not saying you should tear it down. I'm saying you should keep building. Not despite your uncertainty, but because of it. The strongest foundations are the ones you've tested. Korshathis regarded her silently. His ancient eyes studied the small human before him. Finally, he spoke. You argue well, but eloquence is not truth. The conclave must decide whether your philosophy is compatible with our civilization. He turned to address the assembled dragons. We vote now. Should humanity remain in the conclave with their philosophy of doubt accepted as valid? Or should they be asked to leave until they develop more? Certainty? The vote was not quick. Dragons debated among themselves, their voices rising and falling like thunder. Chun stood quietly, waiting. She had said everything she could say. Vaxarthian watched the debates with interest. The split was not along the lines he expected. Young dragons were not uniformly in favor, nor were old dragons uniformly against. Some ancient dragons spoke passionately about the value of curiosity. Some young dragons worried about losing the stability they had grown up with. Finally, the vote was called. Each dragon indicated their choice through the conclave's voting system. The results appeared on the main display. Humanity could remain. By a narrow margin, the vote favored allowing Chun's philosophy of doubt to coexist with dragon certainty. But there was more. Korshathis stood and made an announcement that surprised everyone. The vote is recorded. Humanity remains in the conclave. But there is another matter. He looked directly at Vaxarthian. I propose we rename the immutable theorems. They shall henceforth be known as the working principles. Not because they are wrong, but because we acknowledge they are our best current understanding, subject to refinement as new information becomes available. The chamber erupted in discussion. This went beyond the vote. This was a fundamental change to dragon identity. Korshathis raised his voice over the noise. I have lived for 500,000 years. I have been certain about many things, and I realize now that my certainty has made me comfortable, but it has also made me stagnant. Perhaps it is time we dragons learn to be uncomfortable again. He looked at Chun. You made us doubt. I hated you for it. I still hate the feeling of uncertainty. But I have reviewed the data from your experiment. I have examined the assumptions in other theorems. And I have found that doubt, used carefully, is not poison. It is medicine. Bitter, but necessary. The chamber fell silent. We will establish a joint research initiative, Korshathis continued. Dragons and humans working together to examine our foundational principles. Not to tear them down, but to understand them better. To test what we think we know. To grow, even at our age. Chun bowed deeply. We would be honored. The formal debate ended. Dragons filed out, still discussing and arguing. Some left angry, others excited. All left changed in some way. Vaxarthian approached Chen as the chamber emptied. You did well. I just told the truth, Chan said. She looked exhausted but satisfied. Though I wasn't sure it would be enough. Truth is often enough, Vaxarthian said. Even when it is uncomfortable. Years passed. The joint research initiative grew and flourished. Humans and dragons worked side by side, examining the working principles, testing assumptions, refining understanding. They discovered 17 minor deviations across the various principles. None were revolutionary. All were illuminating. Dragon technology improved incrementally. But more importantly, dragon thinking evolved. Young dragons grew up learning not just what was known, but how it came to be known. They learned to ask questions, to test assumptions, to refine rather than accept. Some elder dragons never adapted. They held to the old certainties until they chose the long sleep, unable to live with perpetual uncertainty. Others, like Vaxarthian, found new purpose in questions rather than answers. On a day, much like any other, Vaxarthian visited Earth for the first time. Chen met him at the spaceport, now older herself, with streaks of gray in her black hair. Welcome to our world, she said. They walked through the city, the dragon drawing stares from humans who still found the sight remarkable. Vaxarthian asked questions about everything. Human architecture, human culture, human history. He wanted to understand this species that had changed his civilization with a simple question. That evening, they sat in a park overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded Vaxarthian of his first scales. We have a saying, Chan told him. The only thing we know for certain is that we can't be certain of anything. Vaxarthian rumbled, a sound that might have been dragon laughter. A paradox. The best ones usually are. I hated you when we met, Vaxarthian admitted. One small human, asking one small question, and suddenly everything I knew was uncertain. And now? Now I teach young dragons to ask questions. I begin every lesson the same way. Vaxarthian looked out at the ocean, at the planet that had produced these strange, short-lived, perpetually curious creatures. I tell them, what we believe today, we might revise tomorrow. And that is not a flaw. That is how we grow. Chun smiled. That's a good lesson. I learned it from you, Vaxarthian said. One human made dragons doubt. And in doing so, gave us something we had not experienced in millions of years. What's that? A future that might surprise us. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. In the growing darkness, stars began to appear. The same stars dragons had navigated for eons, now viewed with new eyes. Certain of nothing, open to everything, and all the wiser for it.